And the Holy Gospel is written in the 9th chapter of John. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." But others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes. Then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for a second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you see, you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord. So why is this happening? How could this have been prevented? Whose fault is this? And maybe most of all, how can I keep this from personally affecting me and the people I love? Those are the questions that have inevitably popped up as the coronavirus pandemic has expanded. They pop up in our hearts and minds and sometimes in our social media feeds, for a variety of reasons. Politics, anger, frustration, fear, and anxiety. Many of these questions are important, and many defy easy answers. Indeed, for some of them, there really is no good answer. But often, these questions can get in the way of doing what needs to be done right now and on focusing on the needs of our neighbors right here. And see, this is actually what's happening in today's gospel reading. Jesus and his disciples are walking around Jerusalem when they come upon a man who was born blind. He's apparently sitting on a corner begging. Without prompting, the disciples begin to ask Jesus the very same questions we've been hearing and thinking lately. Rabbi, they ask, why has this happened? Whose fault is it? This man or his parents? And underlying those questions is the notion that somehow there must be cause and effect in play here. After all, if things just randomly happen, I have no control over them, and then I can't prevent them. But if I can figure out whose fault it is and what they did wrong, then at least I have a fighting chance of having this not happen to me. But Jesus doesn't answer any of those questions. He rejects the idea that anybody is to blame, and he does not explain how the randomness of God's creation can allow this to happen. Instead, he directs his disciples away from those questions and towards what they need to do because they see something like this happening. Jesus literally says, and this is different from the New RSV translation that I just read, he literally says this, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but in order that God's works may be revealed in him, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day." That is, God didn't make this guy blind so that Jesus could come along years later and heal him. Instead, Jesus tells his disciples that they should focus on their works of light, not just the causes of darkness. Jesus tells his disciples that they should focus on the needs of the other person instead of just trying to protect themselves. And Jesus tells his disciples that they should focus on being in community with those who sit in darkness instead of standing outside and analyzing the problem, which is what the disciples do. Because, it seems pretty clear that they are standing there and talking about this guy in earshot. He's sitting right there. And he's blind. He's not deaf. And they're like, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? And it's like he's not even there. Only Jesus actually addresses the man and touches him in a sign of community and solidarity with him. And as the story progresses, lots of other people cannot see or appreciate the works of light that Jesus does because they're still hung up on the questions and the causes of darkness. So, for example, the neighbors, they can't agree on whether this man who used to sit and beg is actually the same guy because they have never experienced anybody who received their sight after being born blind. And since they can't figure out why the guy was blind in the first place, and they don't understand how anybody could fix that, they argue about how he could have actually been blind and been the same person. They also have this debate right in front of this guy who keeps saying, "Hello, I'm the guy," and they pay no attention to him because they're still hung up on the causes of darkness instead of participating in or seeing the work of light. The parents come along, and they are really worried about themselves and whether they'll get kicked out of their community if they're too closely affiliated with Jesus. And so, instead of rejoicing that their son can see, and in that rejoicing participating in the work of light, they drop back and punt. And they say, well, we know this guy's our son, and we know he was born blind, but how he now sees and who opened his eyes, you go ask him. He's legally liable for himself, not us. Even the parents are more worried about themselves than they are in their son. And then there's the Pharisees. The Pharisees cannot accept that this can be a work of light because Jesus didn't work in a way that fits inside their little box. Works of light, in their minds, are supposed to be things that are not done with work on the Sabbath. And Jesus has done two things to violate that. One, he's healed, and the other is he's made mud. Both of those constitute work. And for them, that's a sign of darkness. And because it's a sign of darkness, they can't see the light. Was he really born blind? They don't know. They're still hung up on that question. And so they cannot see or be part of the works of light. Now, honestly, questions about good and evil, light and darkness, and causes and effects are all important questions. They stem from a variety of real and often raw emotions. And we can learn a lot and make the world a better place by asking questions, by seeking answers, and in some cases, holding others accountable. But especially at this moment, Jesus calls us to be people who focus on the works of light. That is, what are we going to do, both individually and as a community, when faced with darkness? How are our words and our deeds and our attitudes towards others going to show God's presence and love right here and right now? What do our works of light look like? You know, it is instructive that the work of light done by Jesus in today's gospel reading came through ordinary mud. And so maybe our works of light, right now they don't look very flashy. They don't look very extraordinary. They don't look like the ways that we usually expect works of light to look like. They don't look like the works of light that Pastor Christine and I often stand up and say, this is what a work of light might look like. Go out there and talk to other people and be near people, because we can't do that right now. But maybe right now, the work of light is the act of actually doing nothing. I mean, really, staying home and doing nothing. Not going out and being potential spreaders of a virus. And it seems counterintuitive, but sometimes sitting down right now and doing nothing can be, if we all do it, one of the most important works of light in the life of our community. Maybe the work of light right now is the act of acting as though I have the virus and I don't want to spread it. Instead of looking at others with fear as though they're going to give it to me. Because if I do that, it really does change my outlook. I mean, I have been good about keeping social distance, right? 6 feet, and I'm learning with Blake that he's on a 6-foot lead, so the tip of his nose to the tip of my nose is about 6 feet, and I have that sense of around me, and I'm doing that, and this is good, but when I encounter other people, if I look at those people and I think, I need to protect them, rather than I'm afraid of them, it changes how I look at my attitude towards others. Maybe that's the work of light that Jesus calls me to. And maybe the work of light, right now, is the act of reaching out to people and finding ways to be in community at a time of isolation, and trying new ways to do that when we cannot physically be present to one another. I mean, we're trying a bunch of stuff at church, and I know other people are doing this too. How do we do that online? How do we do that through Zoom and through Skype and through videos like this? What opportunities does it give us to reach out to people that we haven't talked to in a very long time, that we maybe could only talk to in those ways, and say, hey, how you doing? Maybe that is the work of light Jesus is calling us to. You know, those are all things that we need to do. We all need to do them, and we need to do them right now. You know, Jesus went on to answer many questions, and he never told people to stop asking questions, but he didn't want the questions to get in the way of doing the works of light. And his presence in the world in the end was not for an academic debate or in order to give a few special people special protection. Instead, Jesus came to make God's light real and visible in the world. He showed his disciples how it was done, and he called them to do the same. And that's still what Jesus calls us to do, especially in days of darkness. Amen.